Okay, we'll start with this. The back-and-forth action between Cindy Ryan and Rick Ramos continued earlier today, this afternoon. Rick Ramos stated, I made another historic fight for Matchroom, parentheses, still get treated like the B-side, though. Hashtag Rick Ramos Boxing. Big news is coming soon. To which Cindy replied, if you're on about you turning down my team's offer to fight Summer, then you are the B-side in that fight, I'm afraid. So if you're that confident in Summer, take my team's offer, Rick. Cindy added, my manager asked for Bustos next, so I ain't got no problem fighting your girl. You said she would give me problems, so we have offered you to fight, so come down to my weight and let's go. To which Rick Ramos replied, come down to my weight, excuse number one. To which Cindy replied, you are one big excuse, Rick. You the one saying your girl would give me problems, then get offered to fight and say you don't want to fight me at 143. I'll happily come up, as I said to my coach and manager, but they want me fighting at this weight first. Rick Ramos responded by saying, Matchroom made me an offer without talking about the weight. I reached out to them and told them 147. I haven't heard back. Sounds like someone at Matchroom dropped the ball, not me. Call them. To which Cindy replied, I'll fight at any of them two weights. Don't bother me. Why it's a problem for you to come down? You're the one that said Summer would give me problems. To which Rick Ramos responded, you have 3-0. Relax, champ. To which Sandy replied, 3-0 and you're watching me, LOL. To which Rick Ramos replied, of course I am. No doubt. I've been watching. I watch every fighter. To which Sandy replied, imagine running your mouth saying your girl's this and that and then saying she don't even fight at my weight. You clout chaser.
A miscommunication is what this is all about.
I wasn't sure if it was Rick's intention to start up a little rivalry, a little beef between his girl Summer and Sandy Ryan. I wasn't sure if that's what his intention was, or if it was just a general statement he was making in reference to Sandy's comment that people want to see knockouts. They do, but they want to see knockouts over quality opponents. I'm of the opinion that Sandy Ryan interpreted this as a personal attack on her and her quality of competition, which led us here.
To where now she's asking to fight his girl, Summer Lynn.
I don't know if it was Rick's intention to get Sandy Ryan all fired up, but her having the fiery personality that she has, that fiery
character.
She's with the shits. That's what she is. This fight, however, is not a realistic fight. Summer Lynn has a professional record of 6 wins and no losses to Sandy Ryan, who has a pro record of 3 wins and no losses. You don't expect either of these fighters to end up in a high-risk situation, let alone with each other.
You don't expect it because they're both being groomed.
At least I didn't. I didn't expect it, and I still don't. These are fighters that are still being groomed, still being developed. Thus, you don't expect them to take on any risky fighters, risky situations, be involved in them so soon in their professional careers. I still don't view this fight as a realistic fight, even though there seems to have been some effort to make it happen.
But weight is an issue.
It seems to be. I'm not sure why, because in all of Sandy's pro fights thus far, she has fought above the 140-pound limit. Summer Lynn, she's a welterweight.
So they are within striking distance of each other.
Though matching them up against each other so soon in their pro careers is less than ideal. What the both of them need are gradual step-ups in competition. It seems that Cindy is targeting a fight with former IBF 2-division champion Victoria Bustos of Argentina, and that is a sensible and sensical fight at this point in Sandy's career. I will say it's a hell of a step up.
She's fighting a former champion after only 3 fights?
Why do you think I'm so high on her? Why do you think she's Ring IQ's 2021 Prospect of the Year? Sandy Ryan is looking to make a statement.
If she ends up fighting Victoria Bustos.
Essentially, what young Cindy is saying is if she's ready to take on a former champion in a Victoria Bustos, a former 2-division champion, a seasoned veteran, if she's ready for that, then she's ready for Summer.
But I don't see this thing happening. I don't.
I'm just being honest with you. If they get the fight done, I'll watch it. It's going to be a great fucking fight if they get the fight done. Though, if you ask me if that's what I'm expecting, I'm not expecting it to happen. Sandy might be fighting at just above 140 pounds now. She may be campaigning within the welterweight limit, within the welterweight division, but I've no doubts that she's going to be moving down.
Similar to how Michaela Mayer used to fight at lightweight, then she moved down to super featherweight.
Most people don't know that. It's not uncommon for a fighter to debut at one weight and eventually move down to another. I think the plan for Sandy is to have her campaign in the junior welterweight division, whereas
Summer's staying at 147 pounds. I'm not sure she can even make 140.
At some point in the future, the not so near future, Sandy Ryan and Summer Lynn may end up fighting. But if you ask me, that's something we're on the eve on. No, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't think these two girls will fight for some time.
I'm talking about 2, maybe 3 years.
What I'm talking about. In other news, there seems to be a bit of confusion between 160 pounds and 168 pounds. We know that Charlo, by way of his Instagram stories, posted a graphic of himself
Charlo
boxing against Caleb Plant, former IBF super middleweight champion Caleb Plant. Caleb himself has taken a more direct approach. He posted this to his Twitter account with a caption that reads, "You've been in direct, future of boxing, so I'll be straightforward. We can figure it out by the end of the year. Your easy work."
There's some rumor going around that Jamal was supposed to be fighting Canelo in Canelo's next fight.
And I don't know where that rumor came from. I don't know where it started. But what we're seeing from Jamal and what we're seeing from Caleb is that these guys might end up fighting each other.
There's all sorts of rumors between 160 and 168 pounds right now.
There's a rumor going around that Canelo Alvarez has aborted that mission to become a cruiserweight champion against the winner of Makabu versus Machunu. There's a rumor that Canelo Alvarez's very next fight may end up on Showtime, indicating
His next opponent might be a PBC guy.
which one is the question. Jamal Charlo seems all tangled, tied up in a social media war with Caleb Plant, former IBF super middleweight champion Caleb Plant. Eddie Reynoso had some choice words for David Benavidez.
I'm not sure that's going to be Canelo's next fight.
And if it isn't, that only leaves Anthony Durrell.
Anthony Durrell and David Morrell.
Unbeaten up-and-comer David Morrell, who holds the regular version of Canelo Alvarez's full WBA title. I don't get the sense that David is the guy that Canelo is going to fight because David doesn't even have a fucking profile.
Only hardcore, and I mean hardcore boxing fans know who that guy is.
And that's no slight at his abilities as a boxer, though given his lack of a profile, I don't get the sense he's in the running for a Canelo Alvarez fight. Former WBC champion Anthony Durrell.
I guess that just leaves him.
It'd be pretty strange if Canelo Alvarez ended up boxing Anthony Durrell because Anthony would be a common opponent between Canelo and David Benavidez. David Benavidez, who Eddie Reynoso says hasn't fought anyone.
So if David hasn't fought anyone and Anthony's one of the guys that he fought,
why the hell would you be fighting him? According to you, he's a nobody.
just another nobody that David Benavidez fought.
That being said, I don't get the sense that Anthony Durrell is seriously in the running for a Canelo Alvarez fight. In truth, I don't know who Canelo Alvarez will box next upon his ring return later on this year. But with Jamal Charlo all tied up in this social media war against Caleb Plant,
It's looking more and more like that's going to be Jamal's next fight, not Canelo.
and if it is, I said it before, and I'll say it again, I'm not against that fight. If Jamal Charlo's maiden voyage to the super middleweight division entails taking on a former champion like Caleb Plant, I'm not against it. I'm all for it. It's a sensible fight. It's a sensical fight. It all depends on how the PBC decides to bill it. If they decide to bill it as a pay-per-view, then I'm not on board.
It's a good fight, but it ain't that good.
It's not so good to where it should cost you, and I'm going to like to watch. Neither one of these guys is a world champion in the super middleweight division, thus it's not a title fight. It's not a high-stakes.
You got title fights and unification matches that don't end up on pay-per-view.
So why should this end up there? To satisfy these guys' inflated egos and price demands?
You know the Tim Smith from the PBC.
The same Tim Smith that stated not that long ago that Terrence Crawford hasn't been built. In so many words, he doesn't think he belongs on pay-per-view. But these guys do?
Yeah. Caleb Plant was just on pay-per-view with Canelo.
It's Canelo Alvarez everybody showed up to see. It's Canelo Alvarez, the viewers at home, the ones that actually purchased the pay-per-view. It's Canelo Alvarez they were paying for, not Caleb Plant. Devoid of a Canelo Alvarez, Caleb Plant don't belong on pay-per-view, and everybody knows that. So let's leave the cognitive dissonance at the door.
We see what kind of numbers Jamal Charlo's pay-per-view put up.
And this is what I mean. The same Tim Smith that works for the same PBC that's turning their nose up at Terrence Crawford and what purse demands he might have is the same PBC that might end up putting these two guys on pay-per-view because we know there's no quality control over there. They've got Thurman versus Barrios on pay-per-view after having aired Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz on pay-per-view. They're in no position to talk.
Rick Glacier says that thing put up under 25,000 buys.
And I believe it might do. In fact, I think 25,000 or anything close to it is being generous. That 25,000 or close to 25,000 people would pay to see a fight like that?
The point is there's no quality control over there.
And because there's no quality control over there, Caleb Plant versus Jamal Charlo at 168 pounds might end up being billed as a pay-per-view. Don't get me wrong. It's an intriguing fight. It's a solid fight. A good scrap, a good Donnybrook, a good dust-up. But it ain't so good that it should come with a hefty pay-per-view price tag. It's not that good a fight.
I guess until further notice, we should assume that this is what's next.
Now, just in keeping with the theme of shit pay-per-views, lack of quality control, all that jazz, Rick Glacier stated, boxing enthusiasts speaking out again, it's another PBC pay-per-view flop, as Ortiz Martin did slightly less than 25,000. When will Al Heyman learn not to go up against football, and you can't put on shit pay-per-views, as Heyman keeps proving that. Pay-per-views should only be used for mega fights, and I agree, unless there's a grassroots interest for a fight.
And it's a fight with 2 stars.
Let's make this clear. Just because you have a belt, or you have some belts, maybe more than 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3, that doesn't mean you have the kind of following to where you belong on pay-per-view, behind a paywall.
Take Beterbiev, for example.
Or MJ Akhmadaliev, or Stephen Fulton. These are all unified champions and excellent fighters. I mean, really, really excellent fighters. But none of them have the kind of following here in the United States to where their fights should be behind a paywall.
And thankfully, their fights aren't behind a paywall.
Not yet, anyways. So if these unified champions
All of them.
don't have the kind of following to where you can put their fights behind a paywall, why would 2 guys like Charles Martin and Luis Ortiz end up on pay-per-view? Those guys aren't even champions. They don't even have belts.
Yet you put their fight behind a paywall.
All that's going to do is get less eyes on the fight. That's what's going to happen with that. The same applies to Keith Thurman and Mario Barrios. Neither one of them is a world champion at this time, and neither one of them is buzzing so much to where it makes sense to put them behind a paywall. All that's going to do is get less eyes on the fight. Less eyes and less buys.
Rick says, when will Al Heyman learn not to go up against football?
I'll tell you, even if it wasn't a football game on that same day, it wouldn't have mattered.
Nope.
Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz was a tough sell. Football or no football?
What the fuck makes you think that belongs on pay-per-view?
Well, I'll tell you something. The only reason a fight like that no one is asking for, that isn't a title fight featuring 2 guys that nobody's buzzing about, the only way a fight like that ends up on pay-per-view,
Budget cuts.
you two guys got inflated price demands is what you got. The kind of demands the way the network, they ain't gonna just give you the kind of money you're asking for. So what they're gonna do is put you on pay-per-view in the hopes that the fans will foot the bill.
But the fucking fans are the ones not paying for this fight.
Then what needs to change? I'll tell you what needs to change. The price demands. Charles Martin is not a superstar. Luis Ortiz isn't either. Thus, neither one of them should expect to be paid like a superstar.
It shouldn't cost anybody an arm and a leg to get you out there against somebody with a pulse.
Regardless of what Charles made with Anthony, and regardless of what Luis made with Deontay, because whatever those fighters made against Anthony Joshua and against Deontay Wilder, that has more to do with Anthony and Deontay than it has to do with them.
You know, the market value of a fight is the market value of a fight.
These guys that got these inflated egos, inflated purse demands, fixed guarantees.
As if the market value of every fight is the same.
It's not. Inflated purse demands are the reason we're seeing this proliferation of pay-per-views that no one was asking for. Thus, that is what needs to change.
And you know what? If you ain't got it in the budget to pay these guys...
Wait, they want to get paid. Before you stick them on a pay-per-view that nobody's going to buy, why don't you just fucking let them cross the street once or twice and see what opportunities are out there? See if they can't amass the kind of marquee value that can get them the purses, the kind of purses they're looking for.
Doesn't that make more sense than putting on pay-per-views no one is buying?
And finally, Anthony Yarde's trainer says, "We are next for Joe Smith." Portion of the article reads, "We are next in line," asserted Tunde Ayahi from Dubai, where he is training the light heavyweight contender. Johnson was a voluntary anyway. He's not a mandatory. They picked him. I'd never be disrespectful and say he doesn't deserve the shot, because I think Callum more than anyone deserves a bit of luck. It just so happens he was a voluntary and never a mandatory. So all that's left down to the promoters. And the WBO has said, we're next. So it is what it is.
Now, as you can imagine, Tunde Ajayi is never at a loss for words.
This is a pretty lengthy article, a pretty lengthy read, but in a nutshell, Anthony Yarde is currently ranked as the WBO's #1 contender. And the only way I see around him...
The only way around him for Joe Smith is a unification match.
Joe Smith Jr., who's going to be boxing late replacement Steve Giffard. Steve, who's boxed only once in the last 3 or 4 years.
That was last year in 2021.
And you can forgive Joe fighting a guy like this because Joe initially was supposed to be facing Callum Johnson, but Callum contracted COVID-19, so the powers that be had to muster up what they could, who they could muster up under those circumstances. So close to the fight, the actual fight date, was Steve Giffard. It is what it is, and if Joe makes it past that guy...
It's either he takes care of Anthony Yarde or he unifies with Beterbiev.
This isn't bad news, and it shouldn't be interpreted as such that the Anthony Yarde people are asserting their position in the WBO's rank standings, and they feel they are next in the queue. In many ways, they are, unless the Joe Smith Jr. people follow up on their word and go ahead with that Artur Beterbiev fight, because that's the only way I see them getting around Anthony Yarde.
And Joe Smith Jr. himself says he wants Artur next.
So when you think about it, any way you slice it, provided Joe makes it past Steve, you're going to get a dust-up, a Donnybrook, a real punch-up between punchers, big ones.
Looks like a win-win situation to me.
If Joe Smith Jr. actually fights Artur Beterbiev, regardless of who wins that fight, the winner has to deal with Anthony Yarde. And if by some chance
Joe and Artur don't fight,
Anthony Yarde's still there, and I like the idea of Anthony Yarde versus Joe Smith Jr. for that WBO title. If the unification match can't happen.
it's not bad news. It's not bad news at all.
I will admit that if this situation leaves anyone out in the cold, it's Callum Johnson more than anybody, and I talked about that in a previous video. I don't know that this is an opportunity that's still going to be there for him when he's all healed up from COVID. I don't know. Maybe if they can do the fight between Joe and Artur, maybe Callum can square off against Anthony Yarde. So the winner of their fight will be in position to face the winner of Beterbiev versus Smith Jr. The only potential hindrance in a situation like that is if the Anthony Yarde people are not receptive to a Callum Johnson fight. If that's the situation, if that turns out to be the case, then Callum, he's just shit out of luck.
Not a lot that can be done about it.
Anthony Yarde is currently ranked as the WBO's #1 contender, and so long as he holds that position, he may get the opportunity to box for not just the WBO title, but the IBF and WBC titles as well, provided they can get that unification match over the line between Joe and Artur. And with this
in mind, maybe Anthony won't be receptive to a Johnson fight if it's presented to him.
Smith Jr. versus Gaffrard is going down this upcoming weekend, and we'll see how Joe makes out. I think he should win that fight, and if he does, that's when the real show begins.